Welcome to World on Water Global Sailing News. Hi, I'm Rob Brown. This week the World on Water is special as we feature the biennial classic, the RORC Fastnet race sponsored by Rolex. Starting from the Solent in Cowes, England, the fleet heads east to the Fastnet Rock off Ireland and then back to the finish in Portsmouth. This year, 388 boats lined up to take on this challenging 608 nautical mile race.
Today in Cowes, on the south coast of England, a record fleet has gathered for the start of one of sailing's most demanding challenges, the Rolex Fastnet race. First held in 1925 and defined by its rich history, the race is now more popular than ever, drawing some 388 professional and Corinthian entries from around the world, poised to add another chapter to the continuing legend.
You could be in the smallest boat in the fleet or the largest boat in the fleet, and you know you have a chance of winning if you sail well and you win your class. And I think that's what makes this race unique and very different to most others around the world.
First to start the 48th edition of this biennial race are the Multihulls, away at blistering speed with hopes of a record in the offing. And then lining up on the Royal Yacht Squadron start line, the small and medium-sized yachts, all eager to take on this epic adventure. Before the showcase start of the big Monohulls, including the 100-foot Scallywag from Hong Kong and Rambler 88 from the USA, both hoping to be the first over the finish line in Plymouth and take the prize for Monohull Line Honours victory. As the fleet embarks upon this 605 nautical mile passage, they will head west along the south coast of England, out across the Celtic Sea to the Fastnet Rock, returning to the finish in Plymouth. The first Multihull is expected home on Sunday evening.
The fleet is led by four 100-foot Ultime trimarans who will eat up the 608 nautical miles in a little over 1 day. They are based in Lorient, France, and Brian Thompson explains their unusual race plan.
This year is also a special year. It's the 40th anniversary from '79, which many of you will know, but it's also a special year because we've got some of the biggest boats that we've ever seen in this race. At least we've got four of them. They're the Ultime class, and they're the world's biggest, most powerful multi-hulls, are certainly among them. And I think we've got a little video just to give us a taster and a reminder as to what we're talking about when we say Ultime class. Now, this year, as I say, sees four of them we're going to see in the race. There's Edmond de Rothschild, better known as Gitana 17 that we saw on there. There's Actuel Leader, skippered by Yves Leblevec. There's Massif with Francois Gabard. And perhaps the one that a lot of people really want to see how it stacks up is the brand new Sedebo sailed by Thomas Coville. But although the scale of them is impressive, the talk as to how quickly they could get around this course is even more impressive. As I say, the record at the moment stands at 1 day, 8 hours and 48 minutes. But there's actually been talk of whether 24 hours would be possible, which would sort of mean you'd only have to take sandwiches on a Fastnet, which is a rather bizarre thought in itself. But some even claim, when you look at the average speed, that even 15 hours could be possible for the Fastnet. But to tell us a bit more about the scale of these boats is someone who knows an awful lot about them. Brian Thompson, welcome. Brian, you were the first, for those who don't know, you were the first British person to break the fully crewed round the world race, I believe. You've raced round the world 4 times non-stop, and you spent a lot of time involved with the old teams. So first of all, give us a sense of how fast these boats are. I mean, what kind of typical speeds and top speeds are we looking at?
Yeah, I'm Matt. Yeah, these old teams are incredibly quick. They can do 2.5 times the wind speed. So in the sort of upper teens, they can be doing 40 knots, which is incredible because the sea state is fairly flat then, and they can just be ripping along. And as it gets windier, then they're not quite as quick compared to the wind speed. But 40 knots is quite easy for them to do, even up to 50 at times. So that's why they could possibly do a 15-hour record, but probably not this year. I spoke to one of the guys on Soderbo this morning, and they were looking at 1 day, 12 hours, something like that. But the weather seems to be getting a bit better.
So the record could be broken.
Yeah, it wouldn't be much to do 1 day, 8 hours, be 4 hours quicker than the routing.
And is that because the boats have developed? Is that because the technology's a lot better now? Because Banque Populaire was a 130-foot trimaran, and these are 100-foot trimarans. Why would these be quicker?
Yeah, well, I sailed on Banque Populaire in the Fastnet, and that's a quick boat when it's windy, but in sub 15, the old teams are much faster because they don't need all the stability of the length because the sea state's flat, and so they have a much higher power to weight ratio, and they can reduce their drag by just getting up on their foils. So they could be potentially much faster than the 1 day.
18 hours it was, yeah.
One day, 18 hours. Well, sorry, 1 day, 8 hours.
8 hours.
8 hours current record, yeah.
And so how many crew are we looking at as well on these boats?
I think they'll be going with 6 to 8 crew. They don't need as many. Banque Populaire, we had 14. But these boats, the loads are less, and they're designed specifically for single handling, so they can't take that many. They won't have that many handles to be grinding on.
Now, we've been talking about them, but one of the strange things is that they're not here. Are they just too cool for school? I mean, why don't we see the 100-footers here in the days before the start?
Oh, it would be wonderful if they're all parked here on the mooring. But I remember with Banque Populaire, we left a day and a half before the race, and it's a 400-mile sail up from Lorient to here. And that could be just 20 hours, an easy 20 hours. And there's really not time for them to put the pusher boats and all the shore team and get them up here on the ferry and get them ready to help park the boats again, because they're very unwieldy in harbour. And they need to find a big dock space to get in. So it's they actually end up doing a very long sail of about 1,300 miles to do the Fastnet. So 400 miles up here. They wait in Poole Bay, so that, say on Friday night, and then with the last of the flood tide, they'll come up 2 hours before the start or 1 hour before the start, and wait around here, and then be off, race 600 miles, and then as soon as they cross the finish line, go round the breakwater, and then 300 miles back.
It is a rather bizarre.
So in fact, they're doing just as many days at sea as most people.
Just twice as many miles.
Yeah.
The largest yacht in the fleet is the 100-foot Sun Hung Hai scallywag, skippered by Australian David Witt. He gives his impression on the start.
The Fastnet is also very famous for drawing in people from all over the world. It is, after all, an international race. And just looking at the entries this year, just under half of the fleet, 48% of the fleet is actually British, 24% of the entries are French, and in total there's 26 countries. So it's a truly international race. And today up on stage we've got 2 people here who've come a very long way to come and do this race. David Witt on my left with Scallywag, and Leanne, and from Australia, and Leanne from China. David, welcome. Many people will know you from the Volvo Ocean Race, But tell us, what are you racing up here? What's the boat you're racing for this Fastnet?
We got the 100-footer, Scallywag 100-footer that we've been pretty serious about since the end of the Volvo Ocean race, and we had a bit of a failure in the Rolex Sydney to Hobart last year. So since then we built a new bowsprit, sent the boat to the Caribbean. This is one of the races the boss wants to win and win line honours. He chose a transatlantic. We managed to do that. This one, let's see what happens, and then obviously the Hobart at the end of the race, at the end of the year.
What is it about this race in particular, do you think, that brings so many people from overseas?
Oh, I think it's parallel with our Sydney to Hobart yacht race. It's probably they're probably the two best Rolex and best offshore races in the world. And I get asked that same question about the Hobart race, and I think that it's same, but a little bit different. I think the greatest thing about this race is that people like myself and Brian and professionals can sail fully professional teams, and mum and dad and can compete at the same level. I think there's not too many. Certainly at a professional level, I don't think there's any sport where an amateur team can compete. I think that's actually what makes our sport so special, and I think it gets lost a fair bit.
Now, you mentioned the Sydney Hobart, you've done 20, I think, haven't you? 20 Sydney Hobarts.
Yeah, it's something like that.
What are the similarities, or indeed the differences, between the Sydney Hobart and the Fastnet?
Well, we have a lot better crowd control at the start. We have exclusion zones for power boats, and we only have about 95 boats. You lunatics have like 400, so I'm absolutely shitting bricks how I'm going to get this thing out the harbour without hitting anyone, to be honest.
Well, we like to spice it up for you. Your boat's 100 foot, you're the biggest monohull in the fleet. Presumably you're going for line honours. That's what you have to go for to start with, but we've already heard about the 70-footers and the history of the 70-footers doing very well, albeit on handicap, but Abu Dhabi was on course record. What is it about them? Can you take them on? Where have you got the advantage with the 100-footer?
Well, to start with, to pay for a 100-footer, you've got to be a very rich, and that means a very smart man or woman. And you certainly don't buy a 100-footer to win IRC, but there is a very small window where the boats can get the double. This looks like this could be one of those. For us, it's not a matter of how much the wind change, it just simply comes down to whether we can get through the high pressure ridge. No other monohull will, but on our routing, it's got us, 50-50. If we get through the ridge, we might be able to win the double. If we don't get through the ridge, we'll probably run last. We're the highest IRC rating boat in the world, so that's just the fact.
Here is the start of the Rolex Fastnet off the Royal Ocean Yacht Club in Cowes. First off, the huge ultimate foiling trimarans.
Well, here they go. They just, Massif had just started to pull the trigger, so Sedebo, they accelerated and just slowed down a little bit. But Francois Gabard coming from behind, he's just behind Actuel Leader. He's got some real speed on there. Actuel Leader hasn't actually accelerated just yet. Will Massif get over the top of them? Well, not quite. But the fastest boats out of the traps there was definitely Massif, Francois Gabard, who's not actually leading this pack of 4-old teams. He's actually the last one, but he was certainly going the quickest. The next quickest was Sedebo, that really seemed to, I think they got a bit pressed up on that line, and they were just a bit too early as they came in, and they had to slow down in the last few seconds. And then we got Gitana, the furthest over towards the mainland. They were a little slower to actually pull the trigger. And well, look how fortunes changed. Francois Gabard, who started at the back of the pack of those 4, but pulled the trigger at the right time, is now climbing right up over the top of Actuel Leader, who is really struggling for pace there. And the tables have turned, haven't they, Alex, between these two, certainly?
Absolutely, and Massif is a much quicker, newer boat than Actuel Leader. She's got to windward now, and she's going to overtake. I'm very impressed with Sedebo with her start, but you can now start to see Gitana, who didn't have a great start, starting to close the gap, and perhaps they're just starting to lift free of the water. It does look like there's a bit more wind to leeward down that end than closer up where Massif is.
Yeah, it certainly does, but then there will be in a bit more tide, as we said, but then when you're doing 15 knots, 2 knots of tide doesn't make so much difference. But Gitana now started to pick up. It looks like a little gust come through at the end of the line, and Gitana has found a bit more pace, And it swings and roundabouts actually, because meanwhile the battle between Massif and Actuel Leader, they've both sailed into a bit of a hole. They're closer to the island, so they are sort of closer to the influence of the wind shadow down here, but I think they've just sailed into a bit of a hole. Actuel Leader really struggling for pace there. Massif's not going that quickly either, but meanwhile now it's Chitana coming in from behind. Sadebo's still looking pretty good, but Chitana is the pace-setting boat at the moment, I'd say.
And it does look like there's a few puffs coming over here. Maybe after Gurnard, these boats probably are going to be fully flying. Maybe gusts of 14 knots. We could see them doing more than 30 knots and fully airborne. That's going to be a sight.
And I guess the other thing to think about for these guys as they go down the Western Solent is that there is less tide against them if they go to the southern side of the Western Solent as they head down there. But the problem is, as we're seeing right now, is there just isn't the breeze. And now, out of the four, it's Chitana that really looks to have the upper hand. They're sailing a bit higher, admittedly, but they seem to be in a nicer bit of breeze, sailing over the top of Sadebo. Sadebo's now gone a little bit quiet there, and Actuel Leader and Massif are still struggling for pace. I guess we ought to mention, whilst we're here, of course, there is more than 4 multi-hulls in this race, of course, and we've got a Dascat well, there's quite a few of them, aren't there? There's an even split, actually, between the fleet of the other multi-hulls, that some of them have gone inshore, some of them have gone offshore. We've got GBR 3238, and 3238 is the Edge. That's Chris Briggs.
And Buzz is closer to the green. We've got the blue hull on that multi-hull, the Seacart 30.
She's flying over there. She's definitely got a puff there with the spinnaker up. And actually, when you think about it, Matt, these Dascats, Seacart 30s, they're not far away from these old teams, are they?
No, they're not. And I mean, talk about extremes, though. That's going to be really quite a tough race, isn't it, on the Seacart 30, 600 miles on one of those?
Oh, I don't think I'd like it, but I'd say that Seacart 30 of Buzz is probably the quickest boat, or one of the quickest, probably the third quickest, even quicker than Actuel, one of the old teams, by the way.
Yeah, well, they're in a beautiful position there, aren't they? Because they've started quite close to the squadron end of the line. We know the tide's running to the west out there. It's sluicing them down towards Gurnard. Once they get to Gurnard, as you mentioned, Alex, the breeze, we think, is probably going to puff through that gap and actually pick up, and they could be in a very nice position.
There were 20 Imoca 60 yachts starting for the first time.
Banque Populaire, I'd say, has got the cleanest start, but they're a bit too early. They've still got 10 seconds to go. Banque Populaire, and then we've got Lamotte's there. Lamotte's probably got a good start. I'd say Banque Populaire is going to get this start out of this fleet.
Great start by Banque Pop. PRB's in the front row, V&B. Chiral's one row
clear.
back. But, yeah, clear line. Great start.
Yeah, so we're thinking Banque Populaire got the best start there. Chiral not bad, but a little bit buried.
There's no wind down here. They're a bit shaded, whereas I can see Samantha Davis to windward of everybody, and she's probably the fastest boat in the fleet now. Go Sam.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the other boat that you were eyeing up earlier on, Paprec, the one that's only a couple of weeks old, they're really buried underneath a couple of Class 40s there. Not a great start from them. Obviously 600 miles to go, but we've been hearing all morning about how a large part of this race is all about the start. We're just going to go up and get alongside Chiral and try and get a little bit of a clearer view, because they do now seem to be getting themselves into a bit more clear air. We've got a bit more pace. Banque Populaire sailed into a little bit of a hole there and has slowed down. Boats come up right a bit. Now the breeze is coming back on Banque Populaire. Can they accelerate before Chiral catches them? Meanwhile, tell us a bit about that. What's that green one down to leeward of Banque Populaire, Alex?
Well, that's an older generation B&B now. It's 2007, I believe she is, designed. But
They're
look
in
at
a nice
PRB.
position.
PRB's one is of that generation, 2007, 2009, and been constantly updated by Vasseria. She is leading the fleet here now, isn't she?
It's incredible, isn't it? It just goes to show why this fleet is so competitive when you can have boats of such different generations.
I definitely think we should wander over towards Samantha Davis. She's definitely the fastest fleet. It looks like her foil is working and nobody else's is, so let's expect her to carry on pushing on and hopefully overtake the other two Frenchies there.
She's got a nice bit of breeze here as well, hasn't she? She's got no one to windward. She's got some nice clear air. In fact, quite a few of these boats, as we come across, have got clear air. They are the older generation boats.
Yeah, Boris Herman on Milizia. That was the old Gitana with Sebastian Joss in the last Vendée Globe. He's doing very well.
What kind of, I mean, you were talking about, is there enough wind to put the foils all the way out? What would be going through your mind right now? I mean, what are the options? If you don't think there's enough wind, what do? Pull them back in?
You have to pull them in, otherwise they're just dragging. And they're
How
not
easy is that to do them?
Oh, very hard. So you'll probably have to take the load off the boat, slow the boat down to be able to get them in.
So you've got to make that decision pretty early on and stick with it, really.
Right now, but I'd say definitely Sam's. Every now and again a puff of wind comes, and I see Sam Davis's boat, the bow lifts and she starts to accelerate. You can see she's clearly going a little bit faster than everybody else right now.
The finish in Portsmouth was thrilling as Edmund de Rothschild's Gitana 17 pipped Massive right on the finishing line. Franck Cammas was happy, but not so for Sebastian Gabar.
At 4:32 on Sunday afternoon, the 30-metre foiling trimaran Maxi Edmund de Rothschild crossed the finish line in Plymouth, taking multi-hull line honours as the first boat home in the 2019 Rolex Fastnet race, and eclipsing the previous race record by more than 4 hours. The win for Franck Cammas and Charles Caudrelier followed a titanic struggle with fellow French Ultime Massif that lasted the full 605 nautical miles. Sponsored by Rolex since 2001, this is a legendary race, one that tests the will of the sport's best, and despite trailing for the vast majority, the crew of Edmund de Rothschild were rewarded for continuing the fight to the very end. Prevailing by the finest of margins, a mere 58 seconds, they finished in a time of 1 day, 4 hours and 2 minutes. A stunning victory for perseverance.
The two boats and the two crews are very close, and they play very well. They are fast also, and to beat them is it's still more happy.
The examination of human endeavour continues on the racecourse, where the Monohull leaders are currently engaged in an equally tense tussle. The American yacht Rambler is in a three-way battle with their compatriots on Wizard and Scallywag from Hong Kong. Rambler reached the Fastnet Rock first in windy conditions, holding a slender lead on the water, and is due to finish on Monday morning. Join us again for the conclusion of the Monohull Line Honours contest in the 2019 Rolex Fastnet race.
America's Cup-winning skipper, Aussie Jimmy Spithill, was aboard Massive with Sebastian Garbet, and he said that he learned a thing or two.
Well, Jimmy Spithill, what a race you've just had in the Fastnet.
Yeah, it was an incredible race. It ended up being a bit of a match race, actually. Yeah, 200-foot foiling trimarans offshore to Fastnet and back in a match race. It was unbelievable.
Well, you broke the previous record held by a 140-footer, so that was good. But what a match race. You were neck and neck. You were behind at the Fastnet Rock, but then you overtook.
Yeah, it was quite surprising. We, you know, the Gitana actually is a heavier boat, has more riding moment. But it was quite surprising because at times we were stronger when the breeze was up and reaching, and I thought that would have been the other way around. And then Gitana was actually quite stronger when the breeze, when we were going downwind, or the breeze started going light, which you would think, you know, being the lighter boat. So yeah, but what was amazing was just how close the boats were. I mean, clearly they've got different, you know, strengths and weaknesses, but man, it was just, we were just together the entire race. So, but I mean, look, full credit to Franck and Charles. What a never gave up and pulled it off.
Just the last few miles, really, they overtook you.
Yeah, they were just kind of running us down as soon as the wind started lightening off at the end. They were just running us down, and they were able to maintain flying on the foils, and we no longer could. And yeah, you know, I've sort of seen in the past, foiling's quite quick, so you know, but again, they sailed a great race, you know, just to hang in there, but also to the guys, you know, Francois and the guys on Massive, you know, they what a great group. I really learnt a lot, so it was an awesome experience.
Really, what did you learn then? What was that as an ocean race? How do you compare it?
It's just it's quite a lot different, you know, than say like Comanche, and you know, it's obviously a big boat and it's got a lot of loads, but it's just you're always kind of pushing on the edge, and just the speeds is, you know, just the thing, the noise and the, you know, you're doing over 40 knots at times in the middle of the night, foiling, you know, through waves. It's you know, I was just sort of struggling to, I didn't really get any sleep because I just couldn't relax just thinking of it, you know, and these guys are all out like a light, you know, so they're used to it. But
it's only, you know, you only started yesterday lunchtime.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first Fastnet, and I think I may just quit while I'm ahead because I don't think we'll ever do one as quick as that. You know, it was, man, it was just like an overnight race.
Jimmy, well done. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, that's it for now for another great week on the World on Water. Be watching for more boating news next week. I'm Rob Brown.